He built an empire, but lost his family. On his son's grave, a desperate cry revealed a secret that changed everything. Mr. Alexander Hayes's life was a fortress of glass and steel, his Manhattan penthouse a throne above a city he'd conquered. His name was etched in skyscrapers and headlines, a symbol of wealth that opened doors and silenced doubters. At 52, his dark hair was streaked with silver, his sharp blue eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. His empire spanned continents, but his heart was a barren wasteland, hollowed by the cost of his ambition. Michael, his only son, had been 22 when a car accident stole him away 10 years ago. The memory of that night was a wound that never healed. The phone's shrill ring at 3:17 a.m., the hospital's sterile chill, the moment Michael's hand went limp in his. Alexander had been a distant father, always prioritizing deals over dinners, acquisitions over affection. His daughter, Elizabeth, now 34, had severed ties 6 years ago, her final words a searing indictment: "You were never there, Dad. Not for us. Not for anything that mattered." Now alone in his empire, Alexander was a king without a kingdom, his wealth a hollow crown. Every year on the anniversary of Michael's death, Alexander made the pilgrimage to Willow Creek, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The cemetery was a place of quiet dignity, its headstones whispering stories of lives loved and lost. Michael's grave was simple, a granite marker etched with Michael James Hayes, 1996 to 2015. William had chosen it himself, rejecting the grandiose monuments his fortune could afford. Michael had deserved authenticity, a quality Alexander had failed to give him in life. This year, the ritual felt heavier than ever. The air was thick with the scent of pine and impending rain, and Alexander's heart pounded as he neared the grave. Then he saw her, the woman, her dark hair escaping a messy bun, her sobs cutting through the wind's low moan. Beside her, the boy stacked pebbles, his small hands steady despite the cold. The scene was a violation of Alexander's sacred space, a jarring intrusion into his private altar of regret. Who were they, and what right did they have to share his grief? The stranger's sorrow. Alexander cleared his throat, the sound sharp against the wind's mournful sigh. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes wide, red-rimmed, and glistening with tears. She was young, perhaps 28, her face pale and etched with exhaustion. Her worn jacket and scuffed sneakers spoke of a life far removed from Alexander's world of tailored suits and private jets. "I'm sorry," Alexander said, his voice steady but laced with unease. "This is my son's grave." "Who are you?" The woman scrambled to her feet, brushing her hands on her faded jeans. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm Maria Vance. This is Lucas." She gestured to the boy, who glanced up, his green eyes bright with curiosity before returning to his pebbles. Alexander's gaze flickered between Maria and Lucas. "Why are you here?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his tone. The rose in his hand felt like a weight, its thorns pricking through his glove. Maria hesitated, her eyes darting to the headstone. "I'm visiting my brother, David," she said softly. "His grave is over there." She pointed to a marker a few rows away, half hidden in the gathering mist. "But I knew Michael too. I come here sometimes to remember." Alexander's pulse quickened. "You knew my son?" Maria nodded, her lips trembling. "We were friends. A long time ago." "Mama, is this man sad too?" Lucas looked up, his voice clear and piercing. He asked, clutching a pebble in his small fist. "Mama?" The word hit Alexander like a blow. He studied Lucas more closely, his tousled brown hair, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. There was something achingly familiar in the boy's face, a shadow of Michael's features that sent a chill down Alexander's spine. "Maria," he said, his voice softer now, "why are you crying at Michael's grave?" Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. She knelt beside Lucas, pulling him close. "Because," she whispered, "he was important to someone I loved. And because Lucas is his son." The world spun. Alexander staggered back, the rose slipping from his hand and landing in the frost. "His son?" The words were impossible. A fracture in the reality he'd clung to. Michael had a child. A child Alexander had never known existed. Maria nodded, her gaze steady despite her tears. I didn't want to tell you like this. I wasn't sure I'd ever tell you. Alexander's mind raced, grasping at fragments of a life he'd been absent from. Michael had been private, introspective, but this? A secret family? Who's the mother? He demanded, his voice cracking. Maria's expression hardened. My best friend, Sophia. She and Michael were together, but they kept it quiet. Especially from you. Sophia. The name sparked no recognition. Alexander had been so consumed by his empire, so distant from Michael's life, that his son had built a world without him. Why didn't he tell me? He asked, the question more to himself than to Maria. Because you weren't there, Maria said, her voice quiet but cutting. Michael tried to reach out, but you were always too busy. Meetings, deals, your empire. After the accident, I tried to contact you. I called your office 3 times, left messages with your assistant. You never called back. Alexander flinched. He remembered those months after Michael's death, the fog of grief, the way he'd buried himself in work to escape it. He'd ignored countless calls, dismissed voicemails as irrelevant. Had one been Maria's? Sophia died a year after Michael, Maria continued, her voice breaking. She was heartbroken, lost. Lucas was just a baby. I took him in, raised him as my own. I didn't want him caught up in your world. She gestured vaguely, as if encompassing Alexander's wealth, his distance, his failures. Lucas tugged at Maria's sleeve. Mama, can we go home now? Alexander's chest tightened. The boy's eyes, Michael's eyes, stared up at him, innocent and unknowing. This was his grandson. His blood. Yet the revelation felt like a betrayal, a mirror held up to every mistake he'd made as a father. Alexander couldn't let it go. Lucas's face haunted him, those green eyes, that familiar tilt of the head. He tracked down Maria, finding her at the Willow Creek Diner, a faded relic with cracked vinyl boots and the smell of burnt coffee. She was wiping down tables, her movements weary but precise, her apron stained from a double shift. I need to know more, Alexander said, standing awkwardly by the counter, about Michael, about Sophia, about Lucas. Maria sighed, setting down her rag. Why now, William? You had years to know your son. Her words cut deep, but he pressed on. Because I failed him, and I don't want to fail Lucas too. Maria studied him, her hazel eyes searching for sincerity. Finally, she nodded. Meet me after my shift. I'll tell you what I can. That evening, in Maria's cramped apartment, Alexander sat on a sagging couch, surrounded by toys and stacks of unpaid bills. The space was cluttered but warm, filled with the chaos of a life lived for someone else. Lucas played nearby, building a fort out of cushions, while Maria spoke in a low voice. Michael met Sophia at a community college art class, she said. He was taking it for fun, something to escape the pressure of being your son. They fell in love fast. They talked about a life together, a house by a lake, kids, a dog. Michael wanted to tell you, but he was afraid you'd dismiss it, like you dismissed so much of him. Alexander's throat tightened. He'd never known Michael took art classes, never asked about his passions. And Sophia, he asked. She was my best friend, Maria said, her voice softening. She was kind, funny, fierce. When Michael died, it broke her. She was pregnant, alone, and grieving. She didn't want your money or your name. She just wanted to protect Lucas. Why keep him from me? Alexander's voice was raw, almost pleading. Maria's eyes flashed. Because you were a ghost, William. I tried to reach you after the accident. I called your office 3 times, left messages with your assistant. You never responded. I thought you didn't care. The truth was a knife. Alexander had been drowning in his own grief, shutting out the world. He hadn't known about Maria's calls, but he hadn't made himself available either. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "You didn't want to know," Maria countered. "But Lucas, he's Michael's legacy. And he deserves better than to be a footnote in your life." Alexander began visiting Maria's apartment regularly, bringing small gifts for Lucas, a baseball glove, a model airplane, a book about constellations. At first, Lucas was wary, hiding behind Maria's legs, his wide eyes studying this stranger. But Alexander was patient, sitting on the floor to build towers with blocks, telling stories of Michael's childhood, stories he hadn't shared in years. One afternoon in a park near Maria's apartment, Alexander taught Lucas to throw a baseball. The boy's laughter, bright and unguarded, was a sound Alexander hadn't heard since Michael was young. "You're pretty good, kid," Alexander said, catching a wobbly throw. "Like my daddy?" Lucas asked, his face earnest. Alexander's heart clenched. "Yeah," he said softly, "just like your daddy." Maria watched from a bench, her expression unreadable. Later, as they walked back to her apartment, she spoke. "He's not a project, Alexander. You can't just show up with gifts and expect to fix everything." "I know," Alexander said, and he meant it. He was learning to listen, to be present. It was slow, painful work, but Lucas's smile made it worth it. Each moment with the boy was a bridge to Michael, a chance to reclaim what he'd lost. But the past wasn't done with Alexander. One evening, Maria handed him a shoebox filled with letters and photos. "Sophia kept these," she said. "Michael wrote to her when he was away at college. I thought you should see them." Alexander opened the box with trembling hands. The letters were written in Michael's careful handwriting, full of dreams and love for Sophia. "I want to take you fishing at the lake one day. Just you, me, and the stars." There were photos too, Michael and Sophia laughing at a fair, Michael holding a paintbrush, his face alight with joy. Alexander had never seen that side of his son, and the realization was a fresh wound. "He was happy," Alexander said, his voice breaking, "and I missed it." Maria's eyes softened. "He loved you, Alexander. He just didn't know how to reach you." As Alexander grew closer to Lucas, Maria revealed a deeper connection. Her brother, David, had been in the car with Michael the night of the accident. They'd been best friends, inseparable since high school. David's death had shattered Maria just as Michael's had shattered Alexander. The revelation united two families bound by a shared tragedy, their grief intertwined like roots beneath the earth. David was driving, Maria said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. They were sitting at her kitchen table, a single bulb casting shadows on the walls. He'd been drinking. Not much, but enough. The police said it was an accident, but I've always blamed myself. I should have stopped him. Alexander stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. You couldn't have known, he said, but the words felt hollow. He'd spent years blaming himself for Michael's death, for not being there, for not knowing his son's heart. Now he saw the same guilt mirrored in Maria. There's more, Maria said, her hands trembling. Sophia was in the car too. She survived, but she was never the same. She blamed herself for not stopping David, for not saving Michael. When Lucas was born, she saw him as a piece of Michael she could hold on to. But the grief, it consumed her. Alexander's mind reeled. Sophia had been there. Had witnessed the crash that took his son. And she'd carried that pain alone, raising Lucas until her own death. The layers of loss, of secrets, were almost too much to bear. But Maria wasn't finished. She pulled out a small, leather-bound journal from the shoebox. This was David's, she said. He wrote about that night. He wasn't just drinking. He was running from something. Alexander's heart pounded. Running from what? Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. There was a deal. A shady one. David and Michael got caught up in it. Some guys they met through a friend at college. They were young, stupid, thought it was easy money. That night, they were trying to get away from someone chasing them. Alexander's blood ran cold. Chasing them? Who? I don't know, Maria admitted. David's journal doesn't say. But it wasn't just an accident, Alexander. There was more to it. The revelation ignited a fire in Alexander. His son's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mystery, a wound with jagged edges. He hired a private investigator, Frank Rossi, a grizzled former detective with a reputation for unearthing buried truths. Meanwhile, he continued building his relationship with Lucas, determined not to let the past consume the present. Frank's findings came in fragments, each one a piece of a fractured puzzle. The car accident hadn't been random. Michael and David had been involved in a deal with a low-level criminal outfit in Albany, moving money for a local gang. The night of the crash, they'd been fleeing a confrontation, their car forced off the road by another vehicle. The police had ruled it an accident, citing David's blood alcohol level, but Frank uncovered evidence of tampering, brake lines cut, a second car's paint on the wreckage. Alexander was stunned. His son, the quiet artist who loved fishing, had been tangled in something dark. The guilt deepened. Had Michael turned to this life because of Alexander's absence? Had his son needed money, guidance, something Alexander hadn't provided? He confronted Maria with the findings, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know the details," Maria said, her eyes wide. "David's journal only hinted at it. I thought it was just a stupid mistake, not this." Alexander's resolve hardened. "I'm going to find out who did this," he said. "For Michael. For David. For Sophia." Alexander threw his resources into the investigation, leveraging his wealth and connections. Frank traced the gang to a man named Victor Thorne, a mid-level player in Albany's underworld who'd reinvented himself as a legitimate businessman running a chain of car dealerships. His past was murky, but his present was polished, too polished. Alexander arranged a meeting, posing as a potential investor to get close. The meeting was tense, held in Thorne's sleek office overlooking Albany's skyline. Thorne was charming, his smile practiced, but his eyes were cold, like a predator sizing up prey. "I'm flattered by your interest, Mr. Hayes," he said, leaning back in his chair, "but why the sudden curiosity in my business?" Alexander kept his composure, his voice smooth. "I'm thorough. I like to know who I'm dealing with." Thorne's smile didn't falter, but Alexander sensed unease. Over the next few weeks, Frank uncovered more phone records linking Thorne to a burner phone used the night of the crash, a witness who'd seen a black SUV tailing Michael's car. The pieces were falling into place, but Alexander needed proof. Meanwhile, his bond with Lucas grew stronger. They spent weekends at the lake house Alexander had bought, a place Michael had dreamed of. Lucas learned to fish, his small hands gripping the rod with determination. One evening as they sat by the water, Lucas looked up. "Are you my grandpa?" he asked. Alexander's throat tightened. "Yeah, kid," he said softly. "I am." The moment was a lifeline, pulling Alexander from the darkness of his quest. But the past wasn't done with him. Frank called late one night, his voice urgent. "Thorne's getting nervous. He knows someone's digging. You need to be careful." The unseen threat. Alexander's pursuit of justice took a dangerous turn. One evening as he left his Manhattan office, a black SUV trailed him through the city streets. His driver, Marcus Thompson, a former Marine with a calm intensity, noticed it first. "We've got a tail," he said, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Alexander's heart raced. "Lose them," he said. Marcus wove through traffic, his hands steady on the wheel, but the SUV stayed close, its headlights like eyes in the dark. Finally, they pulled into a crowded parking garage, where Marcus's skills outmaneuvered the pursuer. Alexander's mind spun. Was Thorne behind this, or someone else tied to the crash? Frank's next discovery was a bombshell. The gang Michael and David had worked for was a front for a larger syndicate, one with ties to a corrupt official in Albany's city government. The official, Deputy Mayor Robert Reed, had been on the take, protecting the syndicate's operations. Frank found evidence that Reed had ordered the hit on Michael and David to tie up loose ends. Alexander was shaken. The conspiracy ran deeper than he'd imagined, implicating powerful figures who'd evaded justice for years. He met with Frank in a safe house, a nondescript apartment on the city's outskirts. "This is bigger than Thorne," Frank said, sliding a file across the table. "Reed's got connections everywhere, cops, judges, even your own company." Alexander's blood ran cold. His company? He thought of his board, his trusted advisors. Could someone close to him be involved? He remembered Michael's letters, a passing mention of a family friend who'd introduced him to the deal. Could it be someone Alexander knew? Alexander's suspicions led him to his longtime CFO, Edward Kent, a man he'd trusted for decades. Edward had been close to Michael, mentoring him during college summers. Could he have been the family friend? Alexander hired Frank to dig deeper, and the findings were devastating. Edward had ties to Reed, funneling money through shell companies to fund the syndicate's operations. He'd used Michael as a pawn, exploiting his need for independence from his father's shadow. Alexander confronted Edward in his office, the city skyline a stark backdrop. "Did you get my son killed?" he demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Edward's face paled, his polished facade cracking. "William, you don't understand. Tell me the truth." Alexander slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Edward crumbled, confessing to introducing Michael to the deal, thinking it was harmless. "I didn't know they'd go after him," he said, his voice breaking. "I swear I tried to protect him." Alexander's heart shattered. The betrayal was a wound as deep as Michael's death. He turned Edward over to the authorities, his trust in his old life crumbling. But the confrontation wasn't the end. Frank uncovered a hidden ledger in Edward's office detailing payments to Reed and Thorne. The final piece was a note in Edward's handwriting, "Keep the Hayes kid quiet." As Alexander grappled with Edward's betrayal, a new threat emerged. One night, as he returned to the lake house, he found a note slipped under the door, "Stop digging or the kid pays." The words were scrolled in black ink, a chilling reminder that Lucas was vulnerable. Alexander's blood ran cold. The syndicate wasn't finished with him. He called Frank immediately, his voice tight. "They're threatening Lucas. We need to end this." Frank agreed, but his tone was grim. "Reed's got a long reach, even from behind bars. We need to find his enforcer, the one tying up loose ends." Alexander moved Maria and Lucas to a safe house, a secluded cabin in the Adirondacks, guarded by Marcus Thompson and a team of private security. Maria was reluctant, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I've kept Lucas safe all these years," she said. "I don't need your protection." "Your family now," Alexander said, his voice firm. "I won't lose you too." The words surprised them both, but Maria nodded, her expression softening. They settled into the cabin, the tension palpable as Alexander and Frank worked to uncover the enforcer's identity. Frank's investigation led to a man named Julian Kane, a former mercenary turned syndicate enforcer. Kane was a ghost, operating in the shadows, but Frank tracked him through a series of encrypted emails linked to Reed's network. The final clue came from an unlikely source, Sophia's sister, Rachel, who contacted Maria after seeing the news about Reed's arrest. Rachel revealed that Sophia had kept a hidden flash drive containing evidence of the syndicate's operations. "She was scared," Rachel said, her voice trembling over the phone. She said, "If anything happened to her, I should give it to someone I trusted. I didn't know what to do until now." Maria retrieved the flash drive from Rachel's home in Syracuse, her hands shaking as she handed it to Alexander. The drive contained financial records, audio recordings, and a video, grainy footage of Kane meeting with Reed, discussing the hit on Michael and David. The evidence was undeniable, a final gift from Sophia to bring justice for her lost love. Alexander and Frank took the drive to the FBI, who launched a manhunt for Kane. But Kane was one step ahead, tracking Alexander to the safe house. One stormy night, as thunder rattled the cabin, Kane broke in, his silhouette a menacing shadow in the doorway. Alexander stood between Kane and Lucas, his heart pounding. "You're not touching him," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. Kane sneered, his gun glinting in the lightning. "You should have stopped digging, Hayes." Before Kane could act, Marcus Thompson, the driver, tackled him, the two men crashing to the floor. A struggle ensued, the gun skidding across the room. Maria grabbed Lucas, shielding him as Alexander joined the fray, his fists fueled by years of pent-up rage. Together, they subdued Kane, binding his hands until the FBI arrived. The 11th anniversary of Michael's death arrived, a milestone heavy with closure. Julian Kane, Robert Reed, and Victor Thorne were convicted, their syndicate dismantled. The news dominated headlines, exposing a web of corruption that shook Albany to its core. Edward Kent's testimony sealed their fate, his guilt a public confession. Alexander, Maria, Lucas, and Elizabeth visited the cemetery together, the air crisp with the promise of spring. The sky was a brilliant blue, a stark contrast to the storm of their first meeting. Lucas held a bouquet of wildflowers, his small hands steady. Maria placed a hand on Alexander's arm, her touch a quiet strength. Elizabeth stood beside them, her presence a testament to their fragile reconciliation. "I wish I'd known him better," Alexander said, his voice thick. "I wish I'd been the father he deserved." Maria's eyes softened. "He'd be proud of you now," she said. "For Lucas. For Elizabeth. For trying." Lucas stepped forward, placing the wildflowers on Michael's grave. "I made this for Daddy," he said, pulling a small painting from his backpack, a child's rendering of a lake under a starry sky. "He liked stars, right?" Alexander knelt, pulling Lucas close. "He loved them," he said, his voice breaking. "Just like he loved you." Elizabeth placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder, her touch a silent forgiveness. They stood together, a family forged from loss and redemption, bound by the memory of a son, a brother, a father. With the syndicate dismantled, Alexander turned inward, determined to rebuild what he'd lost. He set up the Michael Hayes Foundation, funding art programs and scholarships for underprivileged kids, a tribute to his son's passion. He poured himself into being a grandfather to Lucas, attending school plays, teaching him to throw a curveball, reading bedtime stories under a blanket fort. Each moment was a step toward redemption, a way to rewrite his legacy. His relationship with Elizabeth was slower to mend. They met monthly, their conversations raw and tentative. "I failed you," Alexander told her one evening, his voice breaking as they sat in a quiet cafe. "But I'm here now, if you let me be." Elizabeth's eyes glistened, her hand reaching for his. "It's not easy," she said, "but I want to try." Alexander began therapy, confronting the guilt that had defined him. He sold parts of his empire, scaling back to focus on family. The lake house became a haven, filled with laughter and memories. Maria became a partner in this new family, her own grief softening as she watched Lucas thrive. She and Alexander grew close, their shared loss forging a bond that was neither romantic nor familial, but something deeper, a mutual commitment to Lucas's future. On Lucas's 10th birthday, Alexander threw a party at the lake house. The lawn was alive with children, their laughter mingling with the lapping of the lake. Lucas ran through the grass, a baseball bat slung over his shoulder, his smile a mirror of Michael's. Elizabeth was there, her presence no longer tentative but steady, a bridge rebuilt. She and Alexander had started a tradition of Sunday dinners, each one a step toward healing. Maria stood beside Alexander, watching Lucas chase a firefly as dusk settled. "You're doing more than okay, Alexander," she said, her voice warm. "You're building something real." He smiled, his eyes on Lucas. "I'm trying." That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, Alexander took Lucas fishing. They sat on the dock, the water reflecting the heavens. Lucas leaned against him, his small body warm. "Do you think Daddy's up there watching?" he asked. Alexander looked at the stars, seeing Michael's face in everyone. "I know he is," he said, his voice steady. "And he's proud of you, kid. Just like I am." 1 year later, on the 12th anniversary of Michael's death, Alexander, Maria, Lucas, and Elizabeth returned to the cemetery. The air was warm with the promise of summer, the headstones softened by morning light. Lucas, now 11, held a new painting, a vibrant scene of the lake house, its windows glowing under a starry sky. "For Daddy," he said, placing it beside the wildflowers. Alexander knelt, pulling Lucas close. "He'd love it," he said, his voice thick. "Just like he loves you." Elizabeth placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder, her touch a quiet affirmation. Maria stood beside them, her eyes glistening but steady. They were a family forged in the crucible of loss, bound by love and redemption. As they walked back to the car, Lucas ran ahead, his laughter echoing through the cemetery. Alexander felt the weight of his past lift, replaced by the lightness of possibility. He wasn't erasing his failures, but he was building a future. Michael's memory lived on in Lucas's paintings, in Elizabeth's cautious smiles, in the love Alexander was learning to give. That evening at the lake house, Alexander stood on the dock, the stars reflecting on the water. He closed his eyes, feeling Michael's presence in the breeze, in the quiet ripple of the lake. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but I'm here now." The stars shone brighter, as if Michael were answering, a silent blessing on the family he'd left behind, now whole in their shared love. Alexander wasn't perfect, but he was present. And for Michael, for Lucas, for Elizabeth, for Maria, that was everything. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on the transformative power of small gestures, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal how true greatness often hides in the most unlikely corners of society, and how the best revenge against an unjust system is to rebuild it with your own values.